This was a really fun, interesting, and educational episode. I had the pleasure of spending time discussing light pollution with Dr. Mario Motta, a prominent cardiologist and amateur astronomer who has been involved with groundbreaking research and outreach regarding light pollution and its impact on the environment, human health, other species, and more. I'm sure that you'll enjoy it as much as I did. Of course, if you're watching on YouTube, you know the routine. Please like the video and subscribe. If you're listening on audio, please leave us a nice review on your podcast platform. It really helps us to get new listeners. Please send us your questions, suggestions, comments, and reviews. You can always email us at astroguypodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 973-404-0380. Also, check out the Astro Guy Podcast group on Facebook. The link for that is in the show notes. If you'd like to help support the Astro Guy Podcast and YouTube channel, you can simply buy us a cup of coffee. The money is used to maintain and update the equipment that we use to create and publish the show. The link is in the show notes. Thank you very much. All right, let's talk about light pollution. Welcome to the Astro Guy Podcast. I'm not an expert. I'm an amateur like you. I'm here to learn and here to teach. So let's enjoy the ride together. Carpe Noctem. Seize the night. So I want to welcome Mario Motta to the Astro Guy Podcast. Dr. Mario Motta, welcome. So we'll start off with a couple of basic questions. How'd you first get interested in astronomy, and when was that?
As far back as I can remember, so it's kind of hard to put a date on it. I mean, as a child, I was. So
You're kind of like me. It's been a lifelong passion.
right.
And do you have a favorite thing that you like to observe the most?
Well, I was going to be doing research in wide-scale distribution of galaxies. I was going to do astrophysics, but ended up in medicine. So that's a very long story, but now, in a way, it's good. I get to do both now.
Now, you're currently retired from medicine, isn't that correct?
I've retired a year and a half ago. Yep.
Lucky you. So, besides astronomy, you have other science interests?
In general fields. I took courses in geology and a few other fields, but primarily astronomy. I was a physics math major.
Ah, okay. And you ended up in medicine. I'm sure that's an interesting story. We'll save that for another time.
Well, basically pre-med is all the science courses that you have to take anyways. So it really didn't make much difference in that regard.
I think I know the answer to this, but what's your favorite telescope or piece of gear that you have?
Well, with the help of Scott Milligan, I built a homemade 32-inch f 6.5 telescope, which is fantastic. I built it primarily because of my interest in galaxies. A large telescope helps.
Yeah, that's I've seen a lot of pictures of it, and I've read articles and things, and that might be a fun one to have you come back. I would like to do something about people with home observatories, and that's probably one of the biggest home observatory scopes that's got to be in the country, I would think.
Yeah, there are some people in the West Coast who have a few larger scopes, but they didn't grind the optics and make every part. So as far as I know, according to Sky and Tell, this is the largest completely homemade telescope and observatory. Made the dome, made every part of the 500. It was 582 parts, but I've made a few others and replaced. So it's actually more than that. And all the optics were handmade.
Wow. And you did the optics, and it was the Scott Milligan's design, or did Scott help with the fabrication as well?
Yeah, I've been building Newtonians since I was a child. At age of 12, I wanted a large scope. My parents were immigrants, so they could only afford what I even then realized was be a small refractor. So I somehow convinced my father to give me the same amount of money, and I'd grind my own optics. He was pretty skeptical at first, but I ended up making a rather nice 8-inch f7 telescope, which I used for a few years with the help of people from the ATMOB, Amateur Telescope Makers of Boston, Paul Vallely in particular. Won a few science awards with that. And I think it actually helped me get into medical school.
So the reason that I asked you to come on is because you're very active with fighting light pollution, IDA, International Dark Sky Association. And, I want to talk about what light pollution is and the impacts of it and all that. So why don't you just describe light pollution in general and what it is and how it affects the night sky?
Sure. Well, basically, any unwanted light adversely affects the environment or a human. That's my definition of light pollution, and that covers a whole host of deadly sins. The light pollution is basically, in my view, three different forms. You have glare, and that affects many elderly drivers. Can affect young people as well, but especially elderly drivers due to scatter of direct light into the eye, which causes what we call veiling illuminance. It can cause human health effects in other ways, such as suppressing melatonin, which is an immune adjuvant, and that's felt to be the reason why certain cancers, especially hormonally linked cancers, increase in both men and women. It can affect sleep disturbances and psychiatric issues from that. And it increases obesity by affecting a hormone called lecithin. And that can lead to increase in strokes and heart disease. So it has a pretty wide range of effects. And then you have the environmental damage, and that has a whole host of issues. Specifically, it affects just about every creature on Earth. The light pollution has caused a marked decrease in insect population. Insects are needed for food production by pollinating flowers and seeds. It leads to bird migration changes, changes in mating season and molting season. It affects plants, trees. Or a nice paper from Purdue shows trees only live 2/3 of their natural lifespan.
Wow.
It even affects plankton. So, as some famous researchers have pointed out, if a particular species hasn't been listed, it's because it wasn't studied yet. Pretty much every species is affected by light pollution. Entomologists, people who study insects, have stated we're living through an insect apocalypse. Now, some of that's insecticides, no question, but a lot of it's light pollution. Places where there are no insecticides or heavy use of it, insects are attracted to bad lights. They die, they don't reproduce, they don't pollinate. So right now, an interesting paper recently has stated that we have 40% less insects in the world than we did 30 years ago. That's a huge drop if you think about it. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I gave a lecture, a talk about 10 years ago, and there was an entomologist who spoke just before me. And the title of his talk is, "Why Are Your Windshields Clean?" And when I was driving as a kid, the windshields were always cleaning the bugs off the windshield, right? Doesn't happen anymore. Hardly ever have to touch the windshield, but mainly because we killed them all off.
Wow. I never thought about it that way, but that's really interesting. So we see how it affects other things in nature, and light pollution, people tend not to really think about it. They think about air pollution and because that's kind of pretty obvious when you can see smoke or foggy days, smog, things like that. But with light pollution, you don't really notice it as a human until you get away from it, and that's when you notice how bad it is.
For any of your listeners, just look up at night. If
Right.
you can only see a few stars, you live in a light polluted area. The normal sky usually has 3,000 stars. You know, hardly anywhere in the country do you see 3,000 stars.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know you're outside of Boston. I'm not far from New York City, and where I am, I'm lucky that, if I can see all the stars in the Big Dipper on a good night. So I know the effects, and I remember when I was in my early 20s, going on a fishing trip out for tuna out in about 70 miles off the coast, and that was the best sky I've ever seen. And you could see stars literally just dropping below the horizon or just rising above the horizon, and it was one of the most. I didn't care about the fishing. I was just watching the sky the entire time. It was really amazing. And another time for me was out in the desert in California, where you really saw the how dark it could get. Getting away from the lights, you can see that. So besides the main causes of light pollution obviously are humans, because we have this fear of the night for some reason, and we have to light things up, so that creates the different things that cause light pollution, light trespass. And if you could go into that a little bit with the causes of it.
Well, it's basically lack of education and thoughtfulness, and just ignorance of the subject. A lot of people put up outdoor lights because they're afraid of the dark. I know where I live, my sky is a Bortle 4.5.
Mhm.
Used to be better when I first moved there. Um, so I can still see the Milky Way, not as great as it used to be. But very few places can do that. That's because I'm out on a peninsula and they haven't put shopping centers in the ocean yet. So it's relatively protected that way. But, it's interesting. People move to this area, buy a house, tear down an old house, put up a new one, and they come from light polluted inner cities. So they're conditioned to think, unless there's a lot of light around their house, something's wrong. So the first thing they do is put up all these spotlights around the house, and they stick out like a sore thumb. A few closer ones, I've spoken to them about it and said, you moved here for a reason. Don't destroy it.
Yeah.
And most take it to heart and gradually cut it down and realize there aren't hordes of people to ransack their house. And it's kind of nice to have a more rural feel to it, where you can still see the sky. But, not everyone is accustomed that way.
We talk about light trespass and glare and sky glow and things like that. Sky glow can be a natural phenomenon, but
Yes, but none of it's bright enough to cause a problem.
right,
This
correct.
is a human problem.
Correct. So, when you're in a light polluted area, you're in the suburbs, you're in the city, and you go outside at night, you don't see that many stars. But when you do go to a place where it's dark, say you go 50 miles from your house out to a remote area, and you look up and you can see a lot more stars, but on the horizon you're seeing these domes of light from the cities. There's a dark sky site here in New Jersey, at a state park called Jenny Jump State Park, and there's an observatory there with a whole bunch of telescopes, and uh, that's for New Jersey, it's a very good sky. But even from there, in the northwest corner of New Jersey, we still see the light from New York City. So
Yeah.
that's certainly an issue wherever you go, at least in most parts of the U.S. Obviously, there are a few places, out in the deserts. And when you look at maps of images from space taken of the Earth, especially the United States, it's really interesting to trace out all the areas where people live. And one of the interesting things is with Africa. When you look at Africa at night, it's mostly the coastlines that are lit up because that's where the people are. There's not many people that live on the interior. They're near the water. And even in the U.S., it's kind of like that. Even though, yeah, there's parts in the middle of the country that are built up, but it's like 70% of the people in the U.S. live within 30 minutes of the coast. So that's where the light's going to be. So the sources obviously things like street lights, that's an obvious one. But what are some other forms of man-made lighting or man-made things that create this horrible light pollution that we have to deal with? And then we're going to get to how we can change it.
Yeah, well, an excess number of unshielded streetlights are a major problem, no question about that. Doesn't have to be that way. First of all, many streets don't require lights. If it's a limited access highway, you don't need lights there. In fact, they're detrimental. The accident rate actually increases as you add more lights. A better answer, and that there's several studies that show that a better answer for limited access highways is to use reflectors. Your headlights are perfectly fine. You actually see better that way because you don't have light shining in your eyes. The human eye constricts when it's exposed to light. So normally, in a perfectly dark area, it would dilate to 7 millimeters. In a typical street setting, driving on a highway with headlights coming at you, it's about 2 or 3 millimeters. And that's still good enough that you can see reasonably well. But if you have lots of streetlights that are unshielded, you're constricting to 1 millimeter. So now you're limiting the amount of light. You're looking at less than 5% of the light that will be coming from these so-called dark areas. Everything looks dark because your pupil's so constricted. Okay, so that actually leads to more accidents. And because everything looks dark, the natural human reaction is we need more lights. But the real answer is design things properly. Like I tell drivers all the time, and when I give a lecture, I ask audience members how many people have trouble driving at night. More than 50% raise their hands. And I say, do you have any trouble driving in the daytime? No. Okay, then the cause here is not your eyes, it's bad engineers and
Right.
bad engineering problems. If they were engineered properly, you wouldn't have this problem and you'd have a much safer street and you'd be able to drive safer at night, including elderly. So this is a solvable problem. We created a problem. It's easy to solve, actually. If lights are shielded, then, I mean, the whole purpose of a light is to bounce off something. So a photon bounces off the car in front of you, off the sidewalk to the side of you, off the street where you're driving. That photon bounces into your eye and you see that object. That's what it's for, right? But if you have a naked light bulb hanging on the street and that goes into your eye, your pupil constricts and you see the brightest spot, which is the light bulb, and not everything else we just mentioned, not the sidewalk, not the street, not the car in front of you as well. Okay, and that's called veiling luminance. It veils what you're supposed to look at. Easily solved. If the light was shielded, then you have the photon, you wouldn't see the direct photons into your eye, which is direct light pollution and glare. You would see what it's supposed to look at, the surrounding areas. So this is a problem we created. It's a problem we can fix.
Street lights, obviously, when we're talking about shielding, the easiest way to describe that is sometimes the old street lights had those domes that came down from the bottom, and or they would just have an incandescent bulb exposed. But you would have two problems with it. One, you get the glare, so it hits you right in the
Yep.
eye, and then it's not going down. So the shielded lights have like an enclosure around them where it directs the light downward, and in some cases even have something to reflect the light downward. I know
Yep.
on my house,
The
I actually
ID,
have a shielded light in my driveway, so I'm not
yeah.
creating any light pollution.
Right. The definition for a properly shielded light is no light emanating above 10 degrees above 10 degrees above the horizontal, below the horizontal. I'm
Below.
sorry, 10 degrees below the horizontal, and the light should come down like that. That way, you prevent light from going 50 miles away, which is what you're seeing at your dark sky site.
Right.
Those are primarily unshielded lights. And blue light especially, the 4,000 K, 5,000 K lights travel 50 to 80 miles, whereas red light tends to bounce around a little more. Anyways, so it's the blue light that's a problem and it's unshielded. The other thing is, if you're thinking about energy savings, if you take an LED light and it's shielded properly, that's great. But if you have an internal reflector for the light that would normally hit laterally and up above, and that reflector bounces the light down, you now have twice as much light as you started with. You can now cut the wattage in half and you save 50% of the energy. So the shielding doesn't just buy you less glare, it buys you huge energy savings because the light that would normally go up and sideways is just wasted light and dangerous light. It causes glare. And when it goes up into space, it doesn't do anyone any good. It's not bouncing off an object on the ground.
Right, right.
So
So,
shielding makes eminent sense in that it uh, allows you to save money by cutting energy usage and prevents the glare that causes the problem. This is why in 2009 I got the AMA to have a policy statement that all lights should be shielded. There was no pushback on that. It's just it took engineers a long time to catch on.
I'm sure you remember when they were building the prison up near Stellafane, how
Yep,
that was, and thankfully we were able to get the state of Vermont to work with the club there to limit the amount of light pollution, uh, although it's still not great. And the fact that they have white stone on the ground isn't great. That they wouldn't bend on, but it does have shielded
yep,
lights, and it was one of the first prisons in the country to
yep.
have shielded lights.
And
And
that's a perfect example
yeah,
of how you can design things properly, save money, not disturb your neighbors, be energy efficient, and actually have better lighting than if they had unshielded glary lights. Because now you can see better in the prison grounds than if you had glare, which would hide things.
so that kind of leads me into the next topic that I want to discuss, which is the different ways that we mitigate it. Obviously, shielded lights are one way, but there's what else can we do as people that are concerned about the environment and how light pollution affects the environment? What can we do to help that?
Well, number one, shield. Number two, use only the wattage that's necessary. Don't overlight. And three, place the lights where they're needed, not unnecessarily put a whole miles and miles of lights on an area that's unneeded. One great example, gave a talk down the Keys, because I spend my winters now in Florida, and at the National Park Service for the Everglades. I was an invited speaker. So on the way home, it was later at night. There was a stretch of road that went on about 20 miles. There isn't a single building on this road that I went. There were double rows of lights along the whole road. I don't know what they were lighting up, but there were no people, there were no houses, there were no businesses. It was kind of road they built to the side, inland a bit, to divert traffic from Homestead and other areas. It's completely lit up needlessly. So, you know, I have no idea why they lit it up. No one can answer that question.
And
And meanwhile, it's causing damage for the nearby Everglades.
what else? Obviously shielding, putting in shielded lights and not lighting the right areas, or lighting the areas that don't need to be lit are huge. But are we seeing cities and towns and states putting legislation in place that
Yeah.
will legislate this?
Well, proper lighting levels and proper color temperature would be the next thing to consider. First of all, LEDs are insanely efficient, but people don't realize that. And most city councilors having the foggiest concept of what a 60-watt LED is versus a 60-watt high pressure sodium versus a 60-watt incandescent bulb. You have to educate them. So, we used to have incandescent streetlights. Those are long gone, which is fine, which is a good thing, although those were actually fine. It's just that most of them were unshielded. So high pressure sodium pretty much replaced them, which is fine. Those are equivalent of 1800 CCT, color correlated temperature. So they're kind of yellowish orange color as opposed to the more modern LEDs. But most of them were 60 watts on side streets and 100 to 120 watts on main streets, right? For high pressure sodium. So people want to change from those to LEDs to save energy, which is a good thing. The AMA in its 2016 paper that I was one of the authors on recommended we do change to LEDs for energy savings. But you got to understand there's a 4 to 5 to 1 uh, energy efficiency. So a 60-watt uh, high pressure sodium should be replaced by at most a 15-watt LED. It's the same amount of lumens, the same amount of light. Electric companies don't tell that to the cities. Most cities and towns, because they have no experts on the board, town council will simply go to the electric company and says, yeah, fine, we'll save money, we'll please put them up. So they say, well, we got perfect lights for you. We'll replace all those high pressure sodium 60 watts, and we have 40 and 50-watt high pressure sodiums.
They're
I mean,
LEDs.
LEDs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now you have 4 times as much light as what you started. Everything's grossly overlit. Many of them are unshielded, and the place looks like a prison. Okay, and the glare goes up exponentially. So you got to, and the reason for that is simple. They don't want to lose. And the electric companies make about $120 per light pole per year by lighting up every street light. So if you suddenly cut the electric use by a quarter, one of their main income streams goes away. So we got to educate people. And so the 60 watts should be replaced by 15 watts, where they were 100 watts, it should be no more than 25 watts. And you get the same amount of light you had before. Okay. Then you got the color correlated temperature, which is archaic and a bizarre measurement that goes back to the 18th century. Back when Rutherford was describing black body radiation, the color of a hot iron rod in a fire was described and categorized. So if you put a hot iron in a cold stove, it'll first warm up to the point where it glows red. If it gets hotter, it'll glow orange. If it gets hotter, it'll glow yellow. And then finally, if you really got a blast furnace, it'll glow whitish blue. But then it starts to melt. For some reason, for some reason, the LED industry and lighting industry has kept that measurement for LEDs, even though of course they're not hot and they produce no heat. So when we say a 2000 Kelvin light bulb, we mean what it looks like as if it was a reddish orange steel that's iron rod that's heated in a cold stove. Why they kept that is beyond me. If we say a 4000 K light, we mean a light that's 30% blue and it's iron just before it melts. It's whitish hot. Okay, so it has nothing to do with temperature. It's just we're stuck with that system, and I wish they'd come with something else. But that's what I mean when we say 2000 versus 2700 or 3000 or 4000 K. What's important is the higher the CCT, the color. That's why it's color correlated temperature. It's correlated to the iron rods. When we say CCT, the higher the CCT is, the more blue is in the light emitting source. So, for example, a 4000 K light, LED light, is about 30, 32 on average percent blue. It varies depending on manufacturer's range, but on average 32% blue. 5000 is almost 40% blue. Those are extremely blue-white. They're almost painful to the eye. 3000 K is 21%, 2700 you're down to 15%. Okay, so the lower it is, the less blue. And the blue is primarily what creates the damage as far as human health is concerned. So that's another reason why you want to limit the CCT, so you limit the blue emission from all these lights.
Oh, that's really interesting. Is there a number that we should look for if we're going out to buy lights for ourselves? Is there a certain number that we should look for that's better?
Well, better is all relative, depends on what your purpose is. So if you're talking about the inside of a house for ordinary evening, okay, there's no way in the world you want 4,000 or even 3,000 K lights. If you don't believe me, buy one. You'll rapidly hit it with a hammer because they're awful. It's very harsh. It's blue, and it's you don't want to live next to that light. And if it's unshielded, here's another reason why you should have shields. Take the shade off your living room lights. See how long you like it. Eventually, you put the shade back on. There's a reason for that, and that's the main reason why we want shades on the outside as well. Yeah, shades protect the human eye and prevent the direct light into the eye, so you see the room better. That's why we have shades on our household lights. And if so, in a house, 2,400 to at most 2,700 is what you would want for nighttime living. If you're in a business in daytime, okay, and you want to mimic outdoor light coming in through your windows, that's the one place where 3,500 to 4,000 makes sense, okay? But you wouldn't want that at nighttime.
It's too
Okay.
harsh.
And if you're in, growing plants, glow lights, those are 5,000 K. That's different. You're growing plants. Okay. Those lights continuously, there are reports that it damages the retina because it has so much blue and accelerates retinal damage as we get older. Macular degeneration is accelerated by excess blue light at night.
Wow. All right. So then some of the advances that we've made in lighting technology, LED, obviously, we've been discussing LED lighting and better shielding and, getting the right temperature, quote unquote, temperature of the light. Um, what are some other things? I mean, it seems like there's so many smart things nowadays, and with motion detectors and things like that, do you think that there's ever going to be something where maybe some of these street lights won't be on all night long, that they'll actually have motion detectors and they'll only come on when they're needed?
Yeah. I was involved with Roland, ROLAN. That's a European-wide conference on light pollution, and in many ways, the Europeans are ahead of us. They've taken this head on. They're not afraid of regulation, unlike certain people in our country. So they're pushing for light sensors and time and daylight day night sensors so that um, they may have streetlights that are shielded, by the way. The Czech Republic has passed a law a few years back. Every light in Czech Republic is fully shielded. And the lights would be on motion sensors. So as you're driving down the street, they would come on as you need them. Other places, such as Cambridge, Massachusetts, put up, unfortunately, 4,000 K lights before the better lights were available, but they had them placed with they're programmable by a central location. So they nowadays only put them at 70%, which is a lot better because they're having a lot of complaints. And then after 11 o'clock at night, they cut the wattage further in half. Okay, so those are ways that you can mitigate the problem, and it's becoming more widespread. I envision a future where streetlights would be dimmed as the night goes on and turned off in areas that don't need them, and maybe turn on only if a motion sensor detects a car coming. That would be the best of all worlds.
Right, right. That seems like it would make a lot of sense, and it would certainly would provide that security that people are looking for. So, uh, how do people go about letting their towns and cities know that there's better lighting out there, that the towns can save money and it can be better and healthier for everybody? What
Yeah,
can people do?
go to their town meetings. pay attention to notices. Usually towns will announce when they're planning on uh, converting the lights. Um, Many towns have already switched to LEDs, so maybe a little late for them, but not all the time. I'll give one example, Seattle. Seattle was an early adopter where they went to 4,000 K lights back around 2010. And the city council has gotten nothing but endless complaints over the last 14 years because people, the average person doesn't know the difference between a 3 and a 4,000 K light. I can tell the difference, but most people can't. They just know that around 3,000 or 2,700 K lights, it's pleasant. Around a 4,000 K light, it's awful. They can't define why it's awful. It just looks awful. Okay. And some people actually get sick because of the color of the light. So what happened in Seattle, they got so many complaints that the town council finally threw up its hands and said, all right, we're going to replace every light in Seattle. And they're in the process of taking down all the 4,000 K lights. And they're putting up 3,000 K lights for main thoroughfares, 2,700 on side streets.
Wow.
Pittsburgh last year voted the same thing to do that. They're replacing all the higher LED lights. Um, the statewide Department of Transportation in Georgia also said they're not going to put up any more 4,000 K lights, primarily because of citizen complaints. If citizens didn't complain, nothing would have changed. So my advice to people listening to this is complain. If the lights near you are awful, let your city council know they're awful. If they want to put up 4,000 K unshielded lights because the lighting company said we have the lights for you, you say no. We want a study on this. We demand that you not put up those kind of lights. One thing people need to know is because so many cities are rejecting 4,000 K lights, and they have such a huge back stock of 4,000 K lights that many lighting companies are just going to whatever cities will accept them and even giving them a discount saying, we'll give you these lights at a huge discount because we're such nice people. Okay. And then once they're up, the citizens hate them because there's so many lights that they have in stock. They're actually shipping them to Africa for unsuspecting countries and basically giving them away at a markedly reduced price because again, people become uneducated and they don't want these kind of lights to be outside their home.
So I know in the past, in my town, a great example, there's a church that's just a few houses away from where I live. And the church sold the land to the Y, which was across the main street. Now they're going to move the Y to this vacant, to where this church was. The parking lot is going to be about 100 and less than 150 feet from where I do my observing and imaging. So I'm not very happy about it. But I was involved with the meetings with the town when they had public hearings about it, and they were on Zoom. And I talked about the proper lighting, that it's really important that they install shielded lighting that are on timers. And because I spoke up, one of the things that they said that they're going to do is that the lights will be on timers, so they won't be on past 10 p.m., which I'm okay with
Okay.
that. Uh, and everything is going to be shielded. They're using fully shielded fixtures. So,
Perfect.
you know, complaining about it, complaining is the wrong word, talking about it, letting people know about it's really important, and that does help. But I think you have to go in there, and if you just say, well, you're messing up my time with the telescope, people don't care about that.
Yeah,
So
I don't lead with that. I stress energy savings, uh, pleasing environment, uh, and uh, prevention of harsh glare, which is very unpleasant to live next to. Those are the things, and energy savings. Those are the things to stress. Then, if you have a child come in and say, "I like to see the stars," they will listen to the child if they won't listen to you.
right. So and those are all excellent things. And I want to get into some other, well, we'll dive into that now. Other areas, places that people can go, or resources that they can use to one, learn more about light pollution and how to prevent it, and how to talk to the people in your town about it. Well, I mentioned an
Yeah.
organization.
Before that, do you have time to talk about the health effects?
Well, absolutely, yes.
So I think it's important. This is, in my opinion, one of the main reasons why we should be controlling light pollution. Yes, drivers at night is important. Safety at night is important. And by the way, speaking of safety, I have over 30 studies from LA, from England. England's done a number of studies that show, in Chicago, that show excess lighting actually increases crime. Great study from LA. For every 1% increase in lighting, there is a 0.1% increase in crime. Okay. I've spoken at many meetings, and sometimes there's lighting engineers there. I've spoken at the IDS annual meeting, and it was in Quebec City that year. And I asked them a simple question. You keep saying that you keep selling these lights for security. Give me one study that shows extra lights adds to security and decreases crime. In 30 years, I've been asking this question. I've yet to receive a single scientific article that proves that point. People just know that extra lighting cuts down crime, even though it doesn't. Great example is University of Chicago did a great study about 15 years ago. In the early 2000s, um, the Chicago thought if we lit up all the have you been to Chicago? They have all these alleyways. If we lit up all the alleyways, then crime would go down. So they got this huge grant. They um, they ran out of money after they lit up 2/3 of the alleyways, which, by the way, were vastly overlit. The equivalent, they made the same mistake I was telling about earlier. They put in LEDs that were 80 watts, so it's like the normal high pressure sodium of 300 watts. So these things look like you're walking on the surface of the sun. I mean, you can see every speck of dirt on every wall. But, okay, so they ran out of money, so 1/3 was still unlit. University of Chicago Criminal Division, they gave out criminal degrees, said this is perfect. We'll study this and prove once and for all how extra lighting cuts down crime. Much to their chagrin, after a year of studying the issue, wherever they put up the lights, crime went up 20%. Wherever they left it alone, crime went down 10%.
Criminals need to see.
Right. So I'm still waiting for a single study. If any of your audience knows of a study that says scientific study. I don't want press R and basically press clippings from industry. I want a scientific study. If anyone has a study, I'd love to read it. Prove me wrong that there is such a study. I searched, can't find one. It is important. We have an immune system that has many moving parts. Okay, so we have what's called T killer cells, and that go around when we sleep at night and pick off bad cells. When your body is not the same as it was, except for your neurons, your body is completely new from 2 months ago. I don't know if you realize that.
Nope.
Okay, all our cells, our skin is constantly renewed, our GI tract is constantly renewed, muscle cells are renewed, but at a much slower pace. So we are not the same person as you were before. This takes a huge number of cell divisions to maintain your body. If you think about it, you're having millions and millions of cell division, more than that, close to billions of cell divisions every day in order to maintain yourself. It's not surprising if you think about it that a few cells divide improperly and create bad cells. Most of these are unstable and die on their own. A few of them lose the ability to control their growth. Those are cancer cells. Okay. We have an immune system that goes around while we sleep at night that finds these cells, the T killer cells, mark them up, and macrophages that come along and eat them and kill them. Well, if it wasn't for that, you wouldn't live past age 1. The reason why older people tend to have more cancers is our immune system starts to decline, and some of these cells survive. But in particular, the the melatonin is a adjuvant to the immune system. And by that I mean it aids the immune system to what it does. It helps it work better. Um, in 2017, the Nobel Prize in Medicine went to the three researchers that figured this whole mechanism out. So it's an important issue if the Nobel Prize went to them, right? So the immune system is aided by melatonin, but every day you produce 10 to 20 cancer cells your entire life. But the immune system kills them off. Especially blue lights now suppress melatonin. So if you sleep in a city where you have outdoor lights shining into your bedroom, okay, most people do these days, it doesn't take a lot of light to suppress the melatonin. And if you diminish the melatonin production and your immune system just a little bit, then it just increases the odds ever so slightly that one of these bad cells will escape detection and start growing. That's the mechanism. It's not that lights cause cancer, the lights suppress the system that kills them off and protects you. Hope that's clear.
That's very clear.
Yeah. Well, that's the mechanism of why, in fact, there are now 24, 25 papers, latest being from Spain. But the paper I like to quote is the one from Harvard that was called the Nurses Study. And they followed 110,000 nurses over 20 something years. And they studied many things about nurses' habits, but specifically, they broke these nurses across the country, across the US, into quintiles. So a fifth of the nurses were selected from inner city, a fifth of the nurses were from suburbs, a fifth were from a little further out suburb, and a fifth were from a rural area. You get that?
Mm-hmm.
And they just followed them for 20 something years. All other habits being the same because they studied many habits, smoking, everything else you can think of. The attribute, when you get up to numbers of 110,000, you got a pretty good study. It turns out, by the mere fact that you live in a central city with light shining in your bedroom, the nurses have a 14% higher chance of breast cancer than the quintile that was living in the rural area, all other things being equal. And for every quintile that had higher light pollution, the rates increased stepwise. Okay. So that's about as direct proof as you can get without grabbing a group of people and saying, you're going to live in a light polluted area and you're going to live in a rural area. We're going to study you. You can't do that, obviously. So that's called an epidemiologic study. Epidemiologic studies are the basis of much of modern medicine when you have um, low level effects that build up over time. Okay. In fact, the level of proof for light pollution causes cancer is level 2A, which is the exact same level of proof as smoking. And no one doubts that smoking's bad for you these days, right? Same level of proof. The only way you can get to level 1 is something like benzene. If you inhale benzene every day, you're going to come down with leukemia. Okay, that's a near guarantee over a period of time. That's level 1, but that's because everyone gets it. Smoking, only 1/3 of people get lung cancer. Same thing with light pollution. Only 14% of women will get increased rate of breast cancer. 40% of breast cancers are through a BRCA gene, and that's genetic. It's different. But still, 14% is significant in men.
Yes.
In men, it increases prostate cancer. There are reports that it increases thyroid cancer, pancreas as well, because those are all hormonally linked. Well, it's something we should pay close attention to. And the final thing with human effects is decreasing your ability to sleep well at night. That increases psychiatric issues, mood disorders, sleepiness in the daytime. Okay, that should be no great surprise there. And for some reason, keeping you up at night It increases obesity. It's not exactly sure why, but it's probably through the lecithin hormone system. Um, and by increasing obesity, don't be surprised if diabetes rises, which it does. That's been proven. People who live in light polluted areas have higher rates of diabetes. And by doing that, you have higher rates of heart disease and strokes. So there's a lot to cover here, but it's just something that's so easily preventable. Light had a recent paper, suspected for years, but paper came out just this year, a few months ago, and excess blue light at night accelerates uh, uh, macular degeneration as you age. So people in cities have worse rate of macular degeneration.
That's surprising, and I didn't know a lot of that stuff. Obviously, that's not my field, and that's why I like to have people like you come on here and talk about that. So, are there other maladies and things that light pollution causes or that impact the way we live our lives?
Well, I hit on the main ones. Everything else after that is suspected, but not proven yet. But there are other effects that are suspected. I'd rather not mention suspect. Everything I've mentioned is scientifically proven facts with multiple papers. Even if there's one paper that says something, I like to see two or three before I say that this is established. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, all right. Well,
That
that's
should be
fair.
enough to scare people, I would hope.
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure it is. So, some other ways that, as amateur astronomers, that we can combat it, besides talking to the people in our communities and the people on our town councils and things like that. There's been a lot of uh, progress made in the last 30 or 40 years with filters to help combat the light pollution. And I'd like to get your take on that.
Filters for what? Cameras,
Well,
eyeglasses? What are you talking about?
visual observation and astrophotography as well. I mean, I
Oh,
know
okay.
all of my astrophotography, I use filters.
Okay. So, yes, I mean, I use them myself for my 32. So, filters are good for narrow band emitted objects such as nebula. So, H alpha filter, oxygen, sulfur, I use those all the time. And I get nice nebula shots because you're selectively allowing only those narrow bands to your detector. However, the background you have right there is galaxies, right? You can't do galaxies in a light polluted area because filters don't work. Galaxies are broad spectrum emitters. So filters don't really work. You can cut down a little bit, but it's nothing like what you can get on a moonless night when you're away from light pollution. The galaxies, you can get all the faint extension of the spiral arms much better in a dark sky area than you can get in a city area. So I know some great astrophotographers in cities who are selectively use narrow band filters, but they only take pictures of nebula for good reason. They can't get pictures of galaxies. They can't get any broad spectrum emitter is not really observable or attainable in high light polluted areas.
I could go into the ins and outs of astrophotography, but to do that from a light polluted area requires a lot of integration time and a lot of
Yeah.
short exposures, which takes up a lot of computing power and everything to finally process it and
Yeah.
make an
You
image.
can
So
overcome them, but you
yeah,
can't really do it well with galaxies.
right. I remember back in the 80s when the UHC filters came out. Uh, and then, the O3 filter was just amazing when all of a sudden you could see these nebula that you couldn't see before. Those work even better under a dark sky than they do
Yep.
in a light polluted area. So it is a little bit of a crutch that we use. Uh, when you live in a light polluted area, you have to image or observe in a light polluted area. It's a little bit of a crutch that we can use. So I wanted to talk about or have you talk about the IDA or other organizations where people can go to learn and get information about light pollution.
Sure. Well, Dark Sky International, IDA, has an enormous wealth of data on their website. feel free to look on their website and download plenty of information which can be used locally and at your city councils. Um, the My website, mariamottamd.com. I have ignore the American Medical Association stuff and go down. I think it's the fourth one down. There is light pollution because I bought the AMA to adopt light pollution measures. And you might ask, why would the AMA be interested in light pollution measures? It's because of everything I just told you. It affects human health. So the mere fact that the AMA not only accepted these reports, but were voted on essentially unanimously by the entire delegation from all 50 states, tells you they felt it was important as well, and that remains AMA policy now. So you can go mariamottamd.com, and there's just a short paragraph, but then you click on the link and it'll bring you to a page where there are a number of studies you can download, including the 3 AMA reports. 2009 report on why we should have shielding, 2012, a rather long paper on a summary of the knowledge up to that point of human health effects, which was significant even then. It's been much more robust now. And then 2016, a long paper on LED lights specifically and why they should be controlled and why we should use 3000K or less. At the time, 3000K was the best lights we had. Nowadays, if I was writing that, it would be 2700 to 2400. Those are two good sources right there. And depending on what state you live in, you may have a local IDA chapter. In Massachusetts, we have IDA Massachusetts. They have lots of good papers and a series of local bylaws from different cities in our state. So those can be used as models. So that's 3 right there.
Yeah, that's terrific. And so let's wrap this up with, where do you think this is going in the future? In maybe 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, where do you think that we're headed as far as light pollution? Increasing, decreasing?
Well,
Is it going to get
here's
better?
the
What do you
problem.
think?
What do I think? The problem right now is LEDs are so inexpensive to run because they're so energy efficient. They convert 92 to 94% of their electricity into light with no heat loss. So they're incredibly energy efficient. They're so cheap to run that people see the light bill drop, and then now they don't give a second's thought as to either leaving the light on or adding more and more lights because they don't see the cost associated with it. So it's an educational thing that we need. We need to let people understand the reason why they're driving poorly at night is because of bad engineers and bad engineering fixtures that are out there. We should protect our health. I was at a conference a few years back when some lighting engineer said, well, you can solve that by just putting blackout drapes if it bothers you. So my response to him was, why should every person in the country spend money for blackout drapes, which means you can't open your window at night, by the way, and have any fresh air, because you can't design a light that's socially acceptable? He got a lot of boos from that response, and I think I won that argument. The point of the matter is, if we're going to spend tax money, especially for streetlights, we should demand that they're the best lights possible, not lights that harm our health or cause glare and increase accidents. Right? It's our tax dollars. So demand the best, don't demand the worst. The cost of a good light fixture compared to a bad light fixture is essentially the same. The energy costs are essentially the same. The only difference is matter of choice. So it's not an economic argument to pick bad lights over good lights. So how will it be in 10, 20 years? Hard to tell, but because you got two competing things, lower cost for energy for these lights, but at the same time, worsening environmental health and worsening human health. that we should combat, and that's a matter of education.
It's not a simple answer, obviously. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to discuss this and enlighten me and other people about this. It's a very important topic, and I think it's one that, when you get into this hobby, it's obvious that it's a real issue. But when you're not involved with astronomy and you see the impact that it has on people's health and that it has on nature, and it has on safety, that's when it starts to kick in with people, and it really makes a big difference. So
It is catching on. For example, I gave a talk at the Everglades a month and a half ago, and the National Park Service has demanded that all lights, furthermore, in national parks will be fully shielded only where they're needed and low CCT. That's a complete change from before. And they're trying to get surrounding communities, because the light goes sideways, to adopt dark sky zones to protect the parks. So it's a matter, now it's a matter of education, and it worked. So if we can do that nationally, it'll be a big help.
that'd be great. And if we could see some more dark sky preserves, that would be nice as well.
It doesn't have to be. Have you ever been to Tucson? It's as well lit as any other American city, has just as many lights. You can look up and see the Milky Way.
Mm-hmm.
That's because all their lights are low CCT. They're all shielded, and there's no uplight. So it is a model city. It can be done. They did it.
Really well populated areas that you can go to and actually see the Milky Way.
And the streets are well lit, I will add.
Yeah. Oh, and that was from the big push from the observatories that are near there.
Yep.
So the impact, and I know that the city of Tucson has saved millions of dollars in electric bills. Again, I want to thank you. I will have information where people can access your website, the IDA website. And it'd be great to have you come back on another time and we could talk about that 32-inch scope and some of the things that you've done with it. And I appreciate it. And everybody wants, you can see Mario. He's the master of ceremonies up at Stellafane for the convention, it's in August this year. I don't remember the date off the top of my head.
August 1 to 4.
August 1 to 4. So, and Saturday night, Mario is the MC and does a terrific job at that. So you can always see him there and talk to him about light pollution and how it affects you. So Mario, thank you again. And thank you so much for tuning in. And I hope that you found our time together to be fun and helpful. If you have questions or episode suggestions, please email us at astroguypodcast@gmail.com or leave us a text or a voicemail at 973-404-0380. If you're not already a member, please join the Astro Guy Podcast group on Facebook. You'll find other members, videos, blogs, and lots of other useful information there for your enjoyment. You can also visit our YouTube channel, the Astro Guy Podcast, for past episodes and other surprises. Please subscribe. Please consider leaving us a review on your podcast platform. It helps us to get new listeners. Thank you again for listening, and may your skies be clear. As always, Carpe Noctem, seize the night. I'm Wayne Zool, and this was the Astro Guy Podcast. Thank you for listening. As always, your questions, comments, and suggestions are welcome. Keep wondering. Keep your eyes on the sky. Have fun. Carpe Noctem. Seize the night.